What does it mean to become a man? What does it take? How do you know when you've passed the test? How do you define what being a man is? Every one of us as men has grown up wrestling with these questions. Some of us have found the answers we were looking for through older men in our lives. A good father, a loving uncle, a coach or a teacher who took us under their wing at just the right time. But a lot of us, most of us really, have a complicated history with the idea of manhood. Maybe we didn't measure up in all the ways our fathers wanted us to. Maybe we didn't have a father at all. Maybe our interests and abilities didn't match what the culture told us we were supposed to be. In this video series, we asked 3 of our BraveHeart leaders to sit down together and share the story of their own personal journey to manhood. We want to help men see that every man's story is unique, and it matters, and that it belongs. And that no matter how messed up you think your story is, it can't stop you from becoming the man you're meant to be.
I can certainly jump in. Yeah. My journey into manhood. I mean, it's such an interesting thought because it was just so frazzled for the longest time in my youth. I mean, I grew up under the hands of an angry man. My dad was an angry man who was abusive, physically, verbally, and then even more so towards my sister. And so it was just a tough going for a long time growing up. I didn't have a good picture of what manhood was. I had the very plastic sort of machismo outlook that you had to, and it was tough for me because I had a vulnerable heart. I have a sort of, a side to me that is very much wants and craves just very real things and real relationships. And I realized quickly that men don't have a high tolerance for that. And so my dad was pretty rough on me. I'd often get, the message I got from my dad was basically, he was sort of the bully in my house. And so when I faced any kind of bully-like situation, the answer to my dad was always, you better, kick their ass before I kick yours. And he was pretty sincere in that. So I learned a very dysfunctional side of manhood, which was to fight to keep from being preyed upon. And that was very difficult in my journey. I had a mom who was really well-meaning, very sincere and generous, but also very naive and kind of emotionally detached in her own emotions, in her own emotional world. So I didn't feel that either of them were really available to me. And so by the time I was about 10 years old, a story I've shared many times, of kind of a telling moment, and one that I think is really challenging to manhood period, is kind of be careful the agreements that you make with things that God has called untrue. And I have a specific memory of being bullied when I was about 10 years old by a kid who was in 6th grade. I was in 5th grade, and I was really afraid of this kid because he was bigger than me, and he was wanting to duel with me, as it were, in the playground after school, and I was really upset. And I don't even remember if my dad was around. He might have been out to sea. He was in the Navy, but I knew I couldn't go to him. I knew the response I'd get, and my mom could tell I was troubled and was asking me about it. And so I kind of broke down and said, "Look, I'm really afraid I'm being bullied by this kid at school, and I don't want to go to school tomorrow." And my mom, in a really well-meaning way, she turned on Christian radio, opened the scriptures, and I don't remember what speaker was speaking that particular day on the radio. It was somebody from the early 80s who was on Christian radio, and he said something, and something in the scriptures led my mom to believe that God was speaking directly to my problem, and she began to weep. And I remember I began to cry, and I think, for the longest time, my mom thought I was crying for the same reason she was crying, but that was not why I was crying. I was weeping because I just thought, your mom is somewhere out in left field and your dad isn't for you and you just don't have a shot here. And so I remember getting up and walking through the kitchen towards the back of the house, the bedrooms. And I literally in my mind heard these words. These are the exact words I heard. You are fucked. You don't have anyone to help you in this life. You're all alone. You better figure this out before you just get trampled upon by everyone. And I just agreed with that. I just thought, yes, that is what's true. And it's taken me years to unravel that.
That was when you were like 10 years old, right?
10 years old. Yeah. And I've said before, like, I don't think anyone would blame you. You hear the story. If you know the background and the content of the story, no one would think like, oh, how could you think that? Or why would you agree with that? But it was very damaging to my life. And so I didn't become a believer till I was 28 years old. And I've probably spent the last 23 years as a believer unraveling that moment when I was 10 years old, just coming back to, no, what God told me is true, is that I'm never alone, that he'll never leave me or forsake me. And I mean, to this day, if my wife and I get in a simple fight, just like something, a basic, it can be like a pretty simple disagreement. The first thing I hear in my head is, see, you're all alone. You don't have anybody. And it's like, no, that's not true. And so I always think of that moment. That's there was like 4 or 5 moments in my youth and adolescence that are very stark to me. But that one to me is a very pivotal moment where it really, where I began to think of manhood in a very warped and distorted way, that you had to, go on the offensive to keep from being hurt or damaged. And it's been tough.
Wow. So when you, in that context, you got your mom, your dad, your sister, and you, that's who you have in your family. So when you were growing up, do you have any buddies? Were there other kids during that time that you were also friends with, or were you fairly isolated that way?
Yeah, I had friends all throughout, but nothing, not till probably middle adolescence to 15 years old, where I really developed some I have a couple of guys that I still know well and run with a bit. That those are long-standing relationships. And it turned out we all had father issues. I never realized that. That was an interesting part of my journey in manhood, is that the guys that I ended up really in adolescence, that we really developed a huge bond. Unbeknownst to all of us at the time, we all had, dad issues. I remember that the 2 of them, their dads had abandoned them. Their real fathers had abandoned them. They both, one had a stepdad and one did not have a dad. And as silly as it was, I remember being jealous at one point of that. I remember thinking, man, sometimes I wish my dad would go away, which is terrible to say.
Yeah.
But, I have a relationship with him now that's cordial, but but that really, I didn't piece that together for years, interestingly, that we all had those father issues, and that was the bond that really brought us together.
Speaking of, go ahead, Chris.
I am curious, your dad, and I'm just curious, I guess, because we see this, that sometimes it is a generational pattern. One dad treats a son a certain way, another dad, that son grows up and treats his son that way. I'm curious in your story if that was the same for your dad's dad, if you know anything about that, and also his relationship with God or absence thereof.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did come to find out that my dad was not only an abuser, he was abused horrifically as a child himself, which, as you say, is often the pattern, the repeat, the sins of the generations, just kind of, being brought to bear. And that gave me more empathy for my dad. Eventually, I can't say it did immediately. Immediately, it was more like, well, he should have known better, but it definitely did. And I'm really grateful in my own life. I think the thing that for me, that's been most gratifying, by no means have I been a perfect dad. There's no such thing other than God the Father, right? So, but I am so grateful that like those generational sins of abuse were stopped in our generation. I have such a great relationship with my son, with my daughter, and I'm so grateful for that. And Jesus gets all the credit for that. If I haven't found Jesus when I did, I'm really not sure, but man, I'm grateful.
I'm curious about that too, because how does he became a Christian at 28, right?
Yeah.
So how did Jesus play into actually your formation as a man and unraveling those vows, I guess, that you made as a kid?
Yeah, my I was 28. My son was just a little over 3 years old when I became. My daughter wasn't around yet, but when I became a Christian. And the interesting thing is, in a bizarre series of events, the reason I really even was interested. I mean, I had been in conversation. I was trying to be an atheist, which sounds like the weirdest thing to say, but I really wanted to be. I was an angry, 20-something. And I was, my dad had been a deacon in the church, and so that didn't leave a lot to be desired when it came to religion. I didn't want to be a part of any religion, but especially Christianity. And I was actually talking with an atheist who actually said something about Jesus that I just blew my mind. Was a person who was an atheist who taught religion at a local university, was an adjunct professor, said, well, at least with Jesus, he always responded the way you'd want some guy to respond who claimed he was God. I mean, his life was hell, but he always responded the way you'd want someone to respond who claimed he was God. And it was like a throwaway comment to that guy, but to me, it stuck so deep. And I remember I just went home and flew off the old Bible, that my mom had given me years before. And I knew enough to know the Gospels housed the stories of Jesus, and I began reading them. And interestingly enough, I had this it feels like it was 5 minutes ago sometimes when I think about it, but I'll never forget reading the Gospels and just totally seeing Jesus for something totally different than I'd ever pictured in my mind. I mean, I grew up in church, but to be quite honest, my perception of Jesus in my youth was that he was some wussy pacifist that had like a lamb on one side of his lap and a child on the other, and was just just took all the beatings and whatever, which and I just had such a warped perception of who he was. And then when I began to actually read the Gospels, I remember just being so just like, I remember having this thought, man, this guy's a man. Like, he's more of a man than I've ever been. Like, I'm not a man. He's a man. Like, he had power, like he seemed to just walk in rooms where the power should have lied with other people. But then when he showed up, it was like whoever was in charge was now at least second, because they just deferred to him. And he changed the temperature in rooms and in settings, but he led, and the power, he never abused the power, and the power never abused him. Like, he never let the power become a corrupter of him, and he used it. And I began to see, as I read through the Gospels, I was just challenged with the thought of, like, man, Jesus, like, he was not a wussy pacifist. He actually laid down his life in strength, from a position of strength, not one of weakness, like of complete power. And that was really a game changer for me. I mean, I was still very stubborn. It took a good little bit, but that was the thing that really, that was the hook that really grabbed me. Was like, I was so drawn. Jesus was everything that I wasn't able to be. I had to be big and bad to stand other people down, or to keep people at bay, to keep them from hurting me. And Jesus was so much of like what I wanted to be, which was like, I was everything. I was like, I want to be that.
Let me ask you, Rob, when you say that, I could see that your face just like this is a man, like more than I'd ever be. Would you say that was the first time you really admired a man and wanted that, like who this person was?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's got to be true, because I don't remember anybody predating that. I mean, I even had a pretty hard relationship at that time with my father-in-law. I thought, my father-in-law probably had an opportunity to be a man of that like to me, but he did not approve of me dating his daughter. I wasn't quality enough in his mind, and so that put a wedge in that relationship too. And so I was kind of starved for that a bit, but that was the first time, and it was such a relief to know that I could find that in Jesus and go to God. And it really did change things for me because I began to seek out wisdom. It was a really, I don't really ever remember any point before 28. I don't remember a time my dad gave me advice. I really don't. If he gave me advice, I don't remember any of it. I don't remember sitting down and counseling me. And even if he had, I just don't think, I think I would have just tuned it out. And I have no memory of it. And I don't remember anybody really doing that, taking that kind of interest. And so, and then when I came to Christ, I mean, it really was the thing that really changed profoundly at that point was I began to seek that. I began to look for men who I thought had been doing life well. Like, I knew I was in over my head as a dad. I mean, I knew it. And just like in so many other arenas of my life, but I began to like seek out wisdom from people who are following Jesus well and doing well in parenting and sitting down and saying, hey, can you help me? I feel overmatched in the situation. That was a big change for me.
This is really interesting. At least I find it interesting, Mike. I don't know about you, but what's really fascinating about your story, Rob, and in particular this point right here, is I think I find that I see it happen the other way around usually, where people are attracted to maybe a man of God, and part of their spiritual story is, well, I followed this youth leader, or I had this mentor, I had this teacher, they shared the gospel with me, like so on and so forth. And then you fall in love with who Jesus is, and you discover who this man is, the Son of God. And even for me in my own story, I don't think I ever had a moment. I mean, I've considered it, but I don't think I've had that moment that you've had of like, this is a man. Like this right here is more of a man than I'd ever be. Like, I don't think I've ever had that realization of that moment. I think that's really unique and special, that you found Jesus first. And he, not only was he the example, but like, he's the man. And there was nothing else in the way or setting the tone for you. Like, this is the man. And let me go find some other people that follow this man so I can learn more about him. That's really cool. I don't know, Mike, if you want to chime in there or not, but.
Yeah, no, I love it too, very much. I do. My story's similar to that in a way, because I was going to say earlier, wanting your dad to go away was true for me too. There was a point in my elementary school when we were asked, and I think it was third grade, fourth grade, don't remember exactly. The assignment was to write a paragraph about your hero, and every other boy in the class was going to write about his dad. And I remember I did not want to write a paragraph about my dad. I didn't want to, and went to my mom, which was a rare moment for me for other reasons, but like I went to her in tears saying, would it be okay if I don't write this about dad? Because I was afraid he would find out and I would get into trouble. And she said that would be fine. But I remember during that time, when I prayed about it, my little boy prayer was, God, I want you to be my dad. And I don't want my dad to be my dad. And so from that point on, it was a little bit different age, different time, but I wanted to be God's son, like in just a legitimately real way, more than I wanted, because my dad wasn't a good dad for me. So yeah, I was grinning because I relate to that idea of, yeah, he is the man, he is the father.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's funny because I raised my kids, tucking them in the bed at night, telling them, like, I love you so much, but I want you to know that you have a perfect father who loves you in ways that I can't even. And that's hard for me to believe, because I love my kids so much. It was hard for me to believe, but I knew, my story bore it out. Like, no, there's a father that loves you even more than I do. He's given everything. But, the 28-year journey to that was it wasn't always great.
Not great.
Yeah.
The thing when I listen to you and the more I get to know you, I see the tenacity in you, man, and how the 28 years was full of tenacity. And then when the channels changed and you were like, Jesus is the man, I see the man you are now. And I'm like, okay, that took tenacity from that age to this age to fight through, to unmake all the lies, to get to the truth, to stand in the truth of who you are now. So it's beautiful, like just great to watch, and it's inspiring to see. I know you're not perfect, but I just love the story of fighting through to get to the truth of who you are.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything that before we move on to anybody else, anything that you would add that you haven't said, you want to make sure we hear about your journey into manhood?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's still happening. I would say that. I mean, like that would be the thing I'd want to add. It's like I'm 51 years old, and I feel like I'm still on that quest. You know what I mean? Like it's not an arrival thing to me. And it was a lot of undoing, a lot of unraveling of 28 years of thinking one way and coming into newness, but at the same time realizing that God is so amazing and sovereign in the way that none of that was wasted. You know what I mean? Everything was a resource to him. And so, like you said, it was like the tenacity was built in, just became refocus on other things. And I mean, I think, you know, I'm trying, the thing that's still a struggle for me, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is that we still live in a culture that we as men have to accept for some responsibility for, that we've created a culture of kind of plastic machismo where you can't show up real. So there's still a very real world where the kid that I was 10 and before and whatever, still has a hard time showing up in a real way, because he still has a hard time believing that it's okay to do that. It's still there, you know. I force myself in more ways now, and God leads me, and God says, you know, I want you to do this, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'll cry. And God's like, yeah, I still want you to do it. I'm like, oh, because I hate crying, you know, because I feel like I'm like standing naked. Right? Man, that's still that kid, you know, who's like afraid of that. You know what I mean?
Right.
But so I'm still on that journey, but I've learned a lot, and I think it's why BraveHeart is so important and what we're talking about, because we're all on that quest. And I think as men have created that sort of culture where you can't really show up sometimes that way, we have to undo it. We have to start undoing it, you know, and say, no, it's okay to show up just like who you are, the way God made you, and the way God has allowed you to experience things. And so, and you guys, the two of you are both huge in my journey of that. So I thank you both. Yeah.